The sleek, black sedan cut through the morning traffic, a bubble of quiet luxury amidst the city's chaos. Inside, chauffeur Nathan Blake's hands were steady on the wheel, his face a mask of calm professionalism. His passenger, the formidable CEO Evelyn Reed, was lost in a world of stock prices and corporate warfare on her tablet. For Nathan, this was just another day, another fare to get him one step closer to paying for his daughter's braces. He was a simple man, a single dad, doing his best. He had no idea that in the next 5 minutes, the highway would erupt into a storm of screeching tires and shattering glass. He didn't know that the men in the black SUVs surrounding them were there to kill his passenger, and that the quiet life he had so carefully built was about to be blown apart. But as the first vehicle slammed into their side, one question would change everything. How does a simple chauffeur know how to drive like a getaway driver for the Secret Service? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The smell of pancakes and coffee hung in the air, a warm, sweet shield against the chill of the early morning. Sunlight streamed through the clean glass of the window, illuminating a small, meticulously kept apartment. Every surface that wasn't essential was covered in the vibrant, chaotic artwork of a child. Crayon drawings of lopsided rainbows, smiling suns, and a recurring stick figure with a huge grin labeled DAD were taped to the refrigerator, the walls, and even the side of the toaster. This was Nathan Blake's sanctuary, a world away from the sterile luxury of the sedan he would soon be piloting through the city's concrete canyons. "Okay, challenge round," Nathan said, flipping a perfectly golden pancake onto a plate already stacked high. The word is unstoppable. His daughter, Lily, sat at the small kitchen table, her legs swinging beneath her chair. At 8 years old, she was a whirlwind of bright energy and missing front teeth. She scrunched her face in concentration, a smear of syrup already on her cheek. U-N-S-T-O-P-P-A-B-L-E, she declared triumphantly. "Like you, Dad, you're unstoppable." A genuine smile broke through Nathan's professional reserve, the one he saved just for her. "That's my girl. You demolish that spelling test today, and this weekend, we're going to the big park, the one with the swings that make your stomach feel funny." Her eyes lit up. "Promise?" "Promise." He ruffled her hair as he placed the plate in front of her. Their morning routine was a well-oiled machine, a ballet of practiced efficiency and deep, unspoken love. While she devoured her breakfast, he packed her lunch, quizzed her on multiplication tables, and made sure her homework was safely tucked into her school bag. He noticed the small superhero keychain dangling from the zipper, its plastic cape frayed and worn. It had been a gift from him 2 birthdays ago, a small token of a strength he hoped she'd always feel. He zipped the bag shut and leaned it against her chair. "Don't forget, soccer practice after school. I'll be there to pick you up no matter what." "I know, Dad. You always are." His gaze drifted for a moment to a framed photo on the wall. It was a picture of a woman with Lily's same bright eyes and infectious smile, her arm wrapped around a younger, happier version of himself. A shadow, brief and almost imperceptible, crossed his features, a flicker of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the warm, steady smile he always wore for his daughter. This quiet life, this predictable rhythm of pancakes and spelling words, was a fortress he had built brick by brick. Every long hour he worked, every deferential nod to a client who looked right through him, was another layer of protection around his small, precious world. The constant, low-level anxiety about providing for her, about keeping her safe, was a hum beneath the surface of his calm demeanor. It was the engine that drove him, the ghost that kept him vigilant. The lobby of Reed Industries was a cathedral of modern capitalism. Sunlight glinted off towering glass walls and polished steel beams, creating a space that was both breathtaking and utterly impersonal. Men and women in expensive suits moved with a quiet, predatory grace, their voices low and intense as they discussed mergers and market shares. Nathan, in his simple, professional black suit, was a ghost in this machine. He blended in perfectly, yet was fundamentally separate from the power that pulsed around him. He stood by the gleaming front entrance, hands clasped behind his back, his posture a study in patient stillness. He had arrived precisely at 8:30, 10 minutes early, his black sedan polished to a mirror shine under the porte-cochere. At 8:40, the glass doors slid open and Evelyn Reed emerged. She was a force of nature compressed into a tailored navy blue dress, her expression sharp, her focus absolute. Two assistants trailed in her wake, firing off last-minute questions and holding out tablets for her approval. She dismissed them with curt, efficient nods, her mind already on the next battle. She didn't break her stride as she approached the waiting car. "Airport, Nathan," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. She didn't look at him, her eyes already locked on the screen of the tablet she held in a vice grip. "And I need to make a call, so no radio." "Of course, Miss Reed," Nathan replied, his voice the epitome of professional deference. He opened the rear door for her, his movements smooth and economical. She slid into the plush leather seat without a glance in his direction, immediately absorbed in the glowing screen. He closed the door with a soft, solid click, a sound that sealed her inside her world of high-stakes finance and him outside in his world of quiet service. As he walked around to the driver's side, he was just a function, a reliable cog in the intricate machinery of her day. He was used to being invisible. It was a key part of the job, a part of the life he had chosen. As he settled into his seat and pulled the car smoothly into the flow of traffic, he glanced at her in the rearview mirror. He saw the tension in her jaw, the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in the hand that gripped her tablet. It was a detail most would miss, a tiny crack in the formidable armor she wore. He filed it away without comment, another piece of data in his constant, silent assessment of his surroundings. The highway was a river of metal and glass, flowing steadily under the mid-morning Sunday. The drive was routine, the hum of the tires on the asphalt, a familiar, monotonous drone. Inside the climate-controlled cabin, Evelyn was on her call, her voice a low, commanding murmur as she dissected a rival's quarterly report. Nathan drove with practiced ease, his focus absolute, his presence so unobtrusive he might as well have been part of the car itself. It was in this bubble of mundane normalcy that the world shattered. It started with a flicker in his side mirror, a black SUV, moving too fast, weaving through traffic with an aggressive, predatory intent. It wasn't road rage, it was tactical. Nathan's eyes immediately flicked to the rearview mirror. A second, identical SUV was closing in from behind, perfectly synchronized with the first. His knuckles, which had been resting lightly on the steering wheel, turned white. His entire body went rigid. The first SUV swerved abruptly in front of them, cutting them off with inches to spare. Its brake lights flared, forcing Nathan to slam on his own brakes. The sedan's advanced safety systems beeped in protest. Before they could come to a complete stop, the second SUV made contact from behind. It wasn't a crash. It was a deliberate, calculated bump, a solid, jarring thud that sent a shockwave through the car. They were boxed in, a luxury sedan caught between two sharks. "What was that?" Evelyn snapped, her call forgotten. "Nathan, what is going on?" Before he could answer, the windows of the flanking SUVs slid down. Men in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by masks, appeared in the openings. The sun glinted off the cold, hard steel of the automatic weapons they leveled directly at the car. A strangled cry escaped Evelyn's lips. "Stop the car! What's happening?" Her voice was sharp with a terror that had just begun to dawn. "Oh my God! They have guns! Pull over! Do what they say!" In the space of a heartbeat, the man she knew as Nathan Blake vanished. The calm, unassuming chauffeur was gone, replaced by someone else entirely. His face became a mask of cold, hard concentration, his eyes calculating, his jaw set like granite. The professional veneer didn't just crack, it vaporized. He didn't pull over. He didn't stop. He floored it. The sedan's powerful engine roared to life. With a movement that was both brutally violent and exquisitely precise, Nathan wrenched the wheel to the right, ramming the rear corner of the SUV in front of them. It was a perfect PIT maneuver. The SUV's back end lost traction, and the heavy vehicle spun out of control, careening across two lanes of traffic. The cacophony of screeching tires and blaring horns from other cars was instantaneous. Nathan didn't wait to see the result. He swerved hard into the now open space, then cut sharply into the emergency lane, the sedan's suspension groaning in protest. The second SUV was already on them, its driver recovering with terrifying speed. The first popping sounds were like firecrackers, quickly followed by the spider-webbing cracks that erupted across the rear window. Bullets. They were being shot at. "Stay down!" Nathan's voice was a low, hard command she had never heard before. It was the voice of a man who was not asking, but ordering. "And hold on! And hold on!" Evelyn's world, a world of controlled risks and calculated gambles on stock prices, had been invaded by a brutal, lethal reality she couldn't comprehend. She was flattened against the leather seat, her heart hammering against her ribs, the scent of cordite and shattered glass filling the air. Her mind reeled, unable to process the transformation of the man in the driver's seat. But for Nathan, this was not panic. It was a grim, familiar symphony. A surge of adrenaline, hot and sharp, coursed through him, but it wasn't the adrenaline of fear. It was the adrenaline of muscle memory, of 1,000 drills in a life he had buried. A dark, grim part of himself had clawed its way back to the surface, and in the midst of the chaos, he felt a cold, profound hatred for it. Through the storm of violence, one clear, agonizing thought pierced his focus, a promise he had made just that morning. Lily's soccer practice, a promise he might not be able to keep. The sedan screamed down the emergency lane, a streak of black and shattered glass. The world outside was a blur of concrete barriers and the shocked faces of drivers in the adjacent lanes. Nathan drove with a terrifying, focused precision, his hands fused to the wheel, his eyes constantly scanning, not just the road ahead, but every mirror, every possible angle of attack. He was a predator in a world of prey, using the flow of civilian traffic as a mobile shield. He'd weave behind a slow-moving semi-truck, forcing the pursuing SUV to fall back, then shoot into a gap that seemed impossibly small, the sedan's frame clearing the other cars by inches. Evelyn was pinned to her seat, a silent scream trapped in her throat. She watched, in a state of profound shock, as the man who polished the car's chrome with painstaking care now used it as a battering ram. He wasn't just driving fast, he was thinking, anticipating, his mind working on a level she couldn't fathom. He was a grandmaster playing a lethal game of chess at 100 miles per hour. As they approached a sweeping overpass, he didn't follow the curve of the highway. Instead, he wrenched the wheel, sending the car hurtling down an off-ramp. The pursuing SUV, caught by surprise, overshot the exit by a fraction of a second. It was the only opening Nathan needed. Halfway down the ramp, he performed a maneuver that defied both physics and sanity. He slammed the brakes, cranked the wheel, and pulled the emergency brake in a single, fluid motion. The sedan spun a perfect 180 degrees, its tires shrieking in protest, the smell of burning rubber thick and acrid. They were now facing back up the ramp, reversing at a terrifying speed, directly into the path of the oncoming SUV. The driver of the chase vehicle, faced with a head-on collision, was forced to swerve, his own heavy vehicle scraping violently against the concrete retaining wall. In that moment of chaos, Nathan whipped the car around again, the J-turn complete, and accelerated down a side street, leaving the highway and his pursuers behind. His eyes darted, spotting the entrance to a multi-level public parking garage. He shot inside, the screech of the tires echoing in the enclosed concrete space. He didn't slow down, driving up the spiraling levels, the centrifugal force pushing Evelyn hard against her door. 3, 4, 5 levels up. Then, without warning, he threw the car into reverse, his head craned, and sped backwards down a different ramp, against the painted arrows and the flow of logic. A car horn blared as a startled driver slammed on their brakes, but Nathan was already past them, his descent a controlled fall. He had seen the second SUV enter the garage at ground level, and knew they would follow his path upwards. By reversing down a different route, he had made them guess. A 50-50 chance. He was betting they'd guess wrong. He emerged back onto the city streets, a different street from where he entered, and ducked into a warren of industrial back roads. Warehouses with broken windows and graffiti-scarred walls loomed over them. He found what he was looking for, a commercial loading zone tucked behind a massive windowless distribution center. With a final skid, he brought the car to a halt in a blind spot between two hulking 18-wheeler trailers, their massive forms hiding the sedan from view. He cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, a physical weight that pressed in on them. It was broken only by the frantic ticking of the cooling engine and their own ragged, desperate breaths. Evelyn's mind was a maelstrom of terror and disbelief, trying to reconcile the man who opened her door every morning with the warrior who had just saved her life. The fear was still a living thing inside her, but it was now tangled with a powerful, disorienting dose of awe and deep, unsettling suspicion. "Who are you?" she finally managed to gasp, her voice hoarse. "How did you do that?" Nathan's head was still on a swivel, his eyes scanning the grimy alley. He ignored her question completely, his voice tight and devoid of any emotion but a cold, hard urgency. "Are you hurt? Check yourself for injuries. Now." His command was so absolute that she found herself obeying without thought, her hands patting down her arms and legs, her mind still reeling. He was running on pure, terrifying instinct. Each maneuver, each calculated risk, had brought with it a flood of unwanted sensations, the feel of a different steering wheel in his hands, the weight of a different life on his shoulders. He felt a deep, cold dread, a certainty that the violence he had run from for so long had finally found him again. They sat in the echoing silence for another minute before Nathan spoke again, his voice low. "We have to leave the car." He got out, his movements still economical and precise, and opened her door. The alley smelled of damp concrete, garbage, and something metallic, like old rust. The gleaming, bullet-riddled luxury sedan, a symbol of her power and status, looked absurdly out of place in this forgotten, grimy corner of the city. "Leave it?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling slightly as she stepped out onto the cracked pavement. Nathan didn't answer. He walked to the driver's side, pulled a small gray microfiber cloth from the glove compartment, and began to systematically wipe down every surface he had touched. The steering wheel, the gear shift, the door handles, the rearview mirror. His actions were methodical, practiced, and utterly chilling. It was the work of a man erasing his own existence. "Your purse, your tablet, your phone. Leave them," he commanded, his back still to her. "This time," she protested. The instinct to hold on to the symbols of her life was too strong. "My entire life is on that tablet. My contacts, my schedules. I can't just leave it." Nathan turned to face her, and his eyes were colder than she had ever seen them. They were the eyes of a stranger. "They tried to kill you, Miss Reed. Your life is what matters. Everything else is a liability. Your phone can be tracked. Your tablet can be tracked. Your credit cards can be tracked. We move, or we die." The words hung in the air, stark and brutal. Her wealth, her technology, her identity, all the things that defined her, were now anchors that could drag them both down. She felt stripped bare, vulnerable in a way she hadn't since she was a struggling entrepreneur with nothing but an idea and a mountain of debt. This forced a grudging, terrifying reliance on the man standing before her. He walked to the trunk and pressed a small, nearly invisible button on the underside of the lip. A panel she had never known existed popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. From it he pulled a small, nondescript black canvas bag, a bug-out bag. It was packed tight, clearly prepared long ago for a day he prayed would never come. He took her phone from her unresisting hand, powered it down, and popped the back open. He removed the SIM card, dropped it on the ground, and crushed it into glittering fragments under the heel of his polished shoe. The act was one of finality, of severing her from the world she knew. He was operating with a detached, grim efficiency, a man running a drill he had practiced in his mind 1,000 times. And with every practiced move, a piece of the past he had tried so desperately to bury clawed its way back into the present. He paid for the motel room in cash, peeling off 3 crisp bills from a roll he took from the bug-out bag. He signed the register with a generic, forgettable name, John Smith, his handwriting a lazy scrawl that was nothing like his own precise script. The motel was a relic from a bygone era, a low-slung building on the industrial outskirts of the city, its neon sign flickering like a dying heartbeat. The room smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and harsh disinfectant. The carpet was a threadbare landscape of faded brown and orange, and the window looked out onto a crumbling brick wall. The moment the door was closed and locked, Nathan moved with that same unnerving purpose. He checked the flimsy chain lock, then wedged the room's single, rickety wooden chair under the doorknob. He did a quick, systematic sweep of the room, his eyes checking the smoke detector, the base of the telephone, the back of the television. He was looking for bugs, for listening devices. The paranoia was so practiced it seemed like second nature. Finally, he seemed to relax, though his shoulders remained tense. He opened the bug-out bag and took out 2 bottles of water and 2 protein bars, handing one of each to her. "Eat," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. Evelyn sank onto the edge of the lumpy bed, the plastic crinkling under her. The adrenaline from the chase was beginning to fade, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and a cold, creeping dread. She noticed a small, stinging cut on her forearm, a thin line of red, where a shard of glass from the shattered rear window must have grazed her. Before she could even properly examine it, Nathan was there. He had pulled a small first aid kit from his bag and was dabbing the cut with an antiseptic wipe. His touch was gentle, surprisingly so, but completely impersonal. He placed a small bandage over the cut with practiced efficiency. The simple clinical act broke something in her. The reality of her situation, of the last hour, crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. She was in a cheap, anonymous motel room with a man who was a complete and terrifying enigma. Her formidable composure, the armor she had spent a lifetime building, finally shattered. "I'm not moving another inch until you tell me what's going on," she said, her voice low and shaking, but with an edge of the same steel that had built her empire. "You're no chauffeur. Were you a cop? Military? Special forces? I'm not an idiot. You don't learn to drive like that, delivering packages. You don't have contingency plans like this for a traffic jam. So you will tell me, right now, who you are." Nathan looked out the grimy window, his back to her, presenting a wall of stubborn silence. The flickering neon sign from the motel's marquee cast rhythmic, distorted shadows across the room, painting his rigid form in shades of red and blue. "I'm the man who just saved your life," he said, his voice flat and devoid of inflection. "For now, that's all you need to know. We need to figure out who sent them and why they want you dead. Everything else is a distraction." "A distraction?" Her laugh was a sharp, bitter sound. "My life has been completely upended. I'm hiding in a place I wouldn't let my worst enemy's dog sleep in, and you think your identity is a distraction? It's the entire point. Are you part of this? Was this some elaborate kidnapping plot that went wrong?" He turned slowly, and the look in his eyes silenced her. It wasn't anger. It was a profound, soul-deep weariness, the look of a man who had been running from something for a very, very long time. "If I wanted to kidnap you, Miss Reed, you'd be in a secure location and you wouldn't be asking questions. They wanted you dead. My only objective was, and is, to prevent that." The cold logic of his words was undeniable. She took a shaky breath, forcing her racing mind to slow down, to think strategically. He was right. For now, he was her only asset. She had to handle this like a hostile negotiation. "Okay," she said, her tone shifting from confrontational to calculating. "Okay. You want to figure out who sent them? I can do that, but I can't do it from in here. I'm a ghost right now. I have no access, no resources. You know how to evade bullets, Nathan. I know how to fight in the boardroom, and I guarantee you the people who did this are the same people I'm fighting there. Let me use my weapons." He watched her, his expression unreadable. He saw the shift, the formidable CEO reasserting control, her mind already mapping out strategies and contingencies. "What do you have in mind?" "I need to contact my head of security," she stated. "Arthur Vance. He's been with me for 15 years. He's the only person on my executive team I trust implicitly. He can start digging, quietly. He'll know where to look, who to ask. No." The word was instantaneous and absolute. "No calls. Any communication is a risk. We don't know who might be listening. Your security chief could be compromised. Your entire company could be." "Arthur is not compromised," she shot back, her voice sharp with conviction. "I trust him with my life. I have, many times. We have protocols for this, emergency codes. He can investigate my chief rival, Alistair Finch. His company has been trying to execute a hostile takeover of Reed Industries for the last 6 months. The timing is too convenient. If I die, his path to acquiring my company becomes 100 times easier." They stood in a tense stalemate, the air thick with suspicion and the smell of disinfectant. Evelyn held his gaze, refusing to back down. She was using the full force of her personality, the same unshakable confidence that intimidated corporate raiders and world leaders. She was arguing for her own agency, refusing to be a passive victim. Nathan saw the steel beneath her corporate polish, the raw intelligence that had built her fortune. He was a man who understood risk assessment better than anyone, and he could see the logic in her argument. His skills could keep them alive, but her resources could end the threat. Reluctantly, he gave a single, sharp nod. "Fine," he conceded, his voice tight. "But we do it my way. Strict parameters." He pulled the burner phone from his bag. It was a simple, featureless black brick. "I'll route the call. It'll bounce through 3 different international relays before it connects to his phone. They'll have a hard time tracing it, but they'll still know a call was made. You have 2 minutes. No names, no specific locations. Tell him you're taking a personal retreat. If I think the line is compromised for even a second, I'm ending the call." He handed her the phone, his fingers brushing hers. For a moment she felt the calloused skin, a reminder of the physical reality of the man, a stark contrast to the digital world she inhabited. She took a deep breath, her mind already cycling through the coded phrases she and Arthur had established years ago. Nathan tapped a few buttons, and after a moment, a faint ringing sound emanated from the small speaker. "Arthur," she said, her voice steady and controlled when the line connected. "It's me. I'm taking that personal retreat we discussed. Effective immediately. Yes, I'm fine. I just need you to handle something for me. I want you to initiate a quiet review of the Finch proposal. Look into their financials, their partners, everything. Treat it as a top priority hostile takeover scenario. I want to know where every dollar is coming from and where it's going. And Arthur, be discreet. No one else is to know about this. I'll be off-grid for a while. I'll contact you when I can." She listened for a moment, then said, "I know. Be safe." She ended the call and handed the phone back to Nathan, her hand surprisingly steady. She felt a sliver of her power return, a sense of being back in her element, strategizing, delegating. She was also deeply impressed and slightly intimidated by the casual, technical expertise Nathan had just displayed. He wasn't just a driver, he was something far more complex and dangerous. Nathan, for his part, felt a profound sense of unease. He had just let someone else into their fragile bubble of security. It went against every instinct he had honed over years of living in the shadows. Later that night, long after Evelyn had fallen into an exhausted, fitful sleep on the lumpy motel bed, Nathan found he couldn't rest. The room felt like a cage, the silence amplifying the roar of his thoughts. He needed information, his own information, from a source he could trust, or at least understand. He slipped out of the room, locking the door silently behind him, the chair wedged back under the knob. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the distant rumble of the highway. He walked 2 blocks away from the motel, his head on a swivel, his senses on high alert. He found what he was looking for on a deserted street corner, a relic of a bygone era, a payphone. The plastic receiver was grimy and cold to the touch. He dropped a few coins in, the metallic clink echoing in the stillness, and dialed a number from memory, a number he had not called in over 8 years, a number he had prayed he would never have to use again. After 5 long rings, a gravelly voice, rough as sandpaper, answered with a single guttural word. "Yeah?" Nathan's posture changed. He hunched over the phone, his voice dropping to a low, clipped murmur, the voice of another man from another life. "Sparrow here," he said, using the call sign he had abandoned. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence filled with shock and something else, something dangerous. "Sparrow?" the voice rasped. "I thought you were a ghost. Buried and gone." "Almost," Nathan said, his jaw tight. "I need a lookup. 2 plates, black SUVs, clean cars, likely cloned, but run them anyway." He recited the 2 license plate numbers he had burned into his memory during the chase. The man on the other end, a man named Jax, let out a low, humorless chuckle. "You know the price for this kind of service, Sparrow. It's not money. You call this number, you're putting your hand back in the fire. Digging up old bones attracts new wolves." A cold dread washed over Nathan. He knew the price. A call like this was a debt, an obligation that would be called in at the worst possible moment. It was a step back into the world he had nearly died to escape, the world he had sacrificed everything to protect Lily from. He felt like he was betraying himself, betraying the quiet life he had so carefully constructed. "I know," Nathan said, his voice barely a whisper. "Just run the plates, Jax. It's not for me. It's collateral protection." "Collateral," Jax repeated, drawing the word out. "Always the professional." "Fine. I'll see what I can find. Don't call me again. I'll find you." The line went dead. Nathan stood there for a long moment, the receiver still pressed to his ear, the dial tone a mournful drone. He felt the pull of old obligations, the invisible chains of his former life tightening around him once more. He returned to the motel room to find Evelyn sitting up in bed, the muted television casting flickering, ghostly light on her pale face. He had brought back a paper bag from a 24-hour diner, and the smell of greasy burgers and fries filled the small, stuffy room, a ridiculously mundane scent in their surreal situation. He handed her a burger wrapped in wax paper and a container of fries. For a few minutes, they ate in a tense, shared silence. The simple, human act of eating, of sharing a meal, however humble, began to chip away at the wall of tension between them. Evelyn watched him as he stared at the burner phone in his hand, his thumb hovering over the screen. "You're worried," she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't look up. "They'll find us. It's only a matter of time. You have a family?" she asked softly, changing the subject, sensing he needed a different anchor. Nathan hesitated, his guard momentarily faltering. Then, with a quiet resignation, he turned the phone towards her. The lock screen was a picture of a little girl with a gap-toothed grin, her hair in two messy pigtails, her eyes bright with a pure, uncomplicated joy. His entire expression softened, the cold, hard mask of the operative melting away to reveal the face of a father. "Yeah," he said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "Lily. She's 8. She's my whole world." He spoke about her with a quiet reverence, about her love for soccer, her terrible jokes, his constant gnawing fear for her future. "Everything I do," he finished, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "It's to keep her world simple. Safe." Evelyn looked from the picture of the smiling girl to the face of the haunted man holding the phone. For the first time, she saw him not as a function, a chauffeur, or a mystery, an operative, but as a person, a man with the same fundamental fears that drove her. It was a fragile bridge of empathy, built in the dim light of a run-down motel room. "She's beautiful," Evelyn said, her voice gentle. "You're a good father." The simple, sincere words seemed to land on him with a surprising weight. In turn, feeling the need to reciprocate, to strengthen that fragile bridge, Evelyn shared something of herself. "My father always told me that you don't build an empire to have power," she said, her gaze distant. "You build it to have a fortress, to protect the people you love. He died before he ever saw me succeed. I suppose I'm still trying to prove to him that I was listening." It was a small, personal revelation, a glimpse behind the curtain of the formidable CEO. Nathan looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not just a client, but a fellow traveler in the lonely landscape of responsibility. By sharing this small piece of himself, he had subconsciously asked for her to understand the stakes for him. It was a moment of calculated vulnerability, a risk that had paid off in the most unexpected of ways, forging a connection that would make their future decisions infinitely more complex. The morning sun did little to warm the grimy motel room. It filtered through the dirty windowpane not as a promise of a new day, but as a harsh, interrogating light, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the faded stains on the carpet. The fragile connection forged over greasy burgers the night before had evaporated with the dawn, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of their situation. Evelyn was awake, perched on the edge of her bed, her posture rigid. Nathan stood by the window, a silent sentinel watching the empty parking lot, his body coiled with a tension that never seemed to leave him. The silence was broken by a low, insistent buzz. It was the burner phone, vibrating against the scarred wood of the bedside table. Nathan moved instantly, snatching it up. A single text message glowed on the small, pixelated screen. His face, already grim, hardened into a mask of stone as he read the cryptic words. Evelyn watched him, her heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. What is it? He didn't look at her. He read the message aloud, his voice a low, flat monotone that was more chilling than any shout. Plates belong to ghosts, leased by a shell corp. Traces back to a Finch holding. The birds are flying your way. Burn this. He pressed a button, and the message vanished. Finch, Evelyn breathed, the name tasting like poison. A cold certainty, sharp and clear, sliced through her anxiety. It wasn't a random attack. It wasn't a kidnapping gone wrong. It was a sanctioned execution, ordered by her greatest rival. Just as the weight of that confirmation settled over them, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. Nathan's eyes narrowed, but he answered, putting it on speaker. "It's Arthur," a voice said, tinny and distant but unmistakably her security chief's. "Go ahead," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "The review you requested," Arthur began, his tone all business. "It's worse than we thought. Finch has been liquidating assets for weeks, quietly, through a series of offshore accounts. He's raising capital for something big, something off the books. And there's more. He's recently retained the services of a private security firm, a company called Argentis Tactical. They're not bodyguards, Evelyn. They're special forces, the kind of people you hire for deniable operations. They specialize in making problems disappear." The two pieces of information clicked together in the stale air of the motel room, forming a single, terrifying picture. A shell corporation leased by a Finch holding. A security firm specializing in the books. Wet work. "Are you sure?" Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. "Positive," Arthur confirmed. "The money trail is complex, but it's there. The implications are significant. Whatever you're doing, wherever you are, stay there. Don't trust anyone." "I understand," Evelyn said, her voice dropping. "Stay safe, Arthur." She nodded at Nathan, who ended the call. A cold, venomous fury surged through Evelyn, eclipsing her fear. This wasn't just business anymore. Alistair Finch hadn't just tried to take her company, he had tried to take her life. He had sent men with guns to slaughter her on a public highway. The sheer arrogance, the personal violation of it, ignited a fire in her she hadn't felt in years. For Nathan, the feeling was different. It was a grim, weary resignation. He had known they were professionals from the moment the first SUV made its move. This confirmation simply gave the enemy a name. Argentis Tactical. He knew the type, men like him from his former life, men who had the same training, the same skills, the same lack of moral restraint when on a contract. He was up against a mirror image of his own past, and he knew just how dangerous, how relentless they could be. His head snapped up, his eyes scanning the parking lot again, this time with a new, heightened sense of urgency. The text from Jax had been a warning. Asterisk. "The birds are flying your way." Asterisk. It wasn't a prediction. It was a statement of imminent fact. They had been found. "We have to leave," he said, his voice a low, urgent command. Now. He was already moving, stuffing the few items they had used back into the out bag. "Forget your things. We go now." Just as Evelyn scrambled to her feet, a sound from the hallway sent a spike of ice through her veins. The slow, rhythmic squeak of a cleaning cart's wheels, moving down the outdoor corridor. It stopped directly in front of their door. Nathan froze, his hand hovering over the doorknob. He held a finger to his lips, his eyes wide with alarm. Through the grimy window, they saw the cart, piled high with gray towels and cleaning supplies, positioned to block most of the walkway. A man in a janitor's uniform was fussing with a spray bottle, his back to them. It was a perfect, mundane picture of motel life. And it was completely wrong. It was past noon, far too late for morning housekeeping. Nathan's eyes darted to the parking lot. A dark blue utility van, the kind used by plumbers or electricians, was pulling slowly into the lot, its engine a low rumble. It wasn't stopping in a parking space. It was rolling towards the front of their room, cutting off their only path to the cheap used sedan Nathan had bought for cash the day before. The trap was sprung. The janitor suddenly dropped his spray bottle. As he bent to retrieve it, his hand didn't come up with the bottle. It came up with a black pistol, a suppressor screwed onto its barrel. In the same instant, Nathan was moving. He shoved Evelyn hard, pushing her away from the door and towards the back of the room. "Get down!" he roared. He dropped to one knee, his hand darting to his ankle. With a single, fluid motion, he pulled up his pant leg, unstrapped a compact handgun from a hidden holster, and chambered a round. The metallic times, click times, was the loudest sound in the world. Evelyn stared, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. He'd had a gun. This entire time, through the chase, the tense conversations, the shared meal, he had been armed. The deception was staggering, yet in a paradoxical way, it solidified her trust in him completely. He wasn't just reacting, he was prepared. He had been prepared for this from the very beginning. He didn't go for the door. He didn't go for the window. He grabbed her arm, pulling her towards the small, cramped bathroom. "This way," he hissed. He kicked open the bathroom door, shoved her inside, and slammed it shut behind them. He didn't stop. He yanked the cheap shower curtain from its rings and threw it aside, then used the butt of his pistol to smash the small, frosted window set high in the shower stall. Glass rained down onto the fiberglass floor. "Through here, go," he ordered. The window was small, leading out to the back of the motel, a narrow, weed-choked alley. It was a desperate escape route. Outside, they could hear the van screech to a halt and the sound of doors sliding open. Nathan practically threw her through the opening. She tumbled out onto the dirt and gravel, scraping her hands, her tailored suit jacket tearing at the shoulder. He was right behind her, landing in a crouch, his gun up, scanning the alley. "Run!" he yelled, pulling her to her feet. "Don't look back, just run." They sprinted down the alley, their footsteps crunching on the gravel. Behind them they heard a door splinter and men shouting. A short, intense foot chase began. They burst out of the alley and into a quiet residential neighborhood, a surreal landscape of manicured lawns and picket fences. Nathan vaulted a low wooden fence without breaking stride, his movements practiced and agile. He turned and hauled a clumsy, terrified Evelyn over after him, his grip like iron on her arm. "You have a gun," she gasped, her lungs burning, her words coming in ragged bursts. "You've had a gun this whole time?" "Fence now," was his only reply, his voice a harsh whisper as he pushed her towards the next backyard. He was furious with himself, a cold rage burning in his gut. He had let them get too close. He had underestimated their speed, their resources. The chase brought back the visceral, heart-pounding terror of his past, the adrenaline and the fear, a familiar toxic cocktail in his veins. Every frantic step, every gasp for breath from the woman he was dragging along, was a testament to his failure. He was terrified that a stray bullet, a single mistake, would get her killed. They were on the run with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the contents of his bug-out bag. Hours later, the stolen pickup truck, a beat-up Ford from a construction site they'd passed 5 miles back from the motel, rumbled down a dirt road so overgrown it was little more than 2 tire tracks carved through a dense forest. The jarring ride had long since become a hypnotic rhythm. Evelyn stared out the window, the endless sea of pine trees, a suffocating green wall. They had been driving for what felt like an eternity, heading north, away from the city, away from civilization, away from everything she knew. Nathan drove with a grim, silent focus, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror, even here, in the middle of nowhere. Finally, he slowed the truck and turned onto an even less defined path, the branches of overgrown trees scraping against the truck's sides like skeletal fingers. After another quarter of a mile, the trees opened up into a small, secluded clearing. In the center of it stood a cabin. It was a simple, rustic structure, built of dark wood, with a stone chimney and a metal roof. It was solid, defensible, and utterly isolated. Nathan cut the engine. The sudden silence of the deep woods was absolute, a profound quiet that seemed to swallow all sound. "A cabin?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. "This is yours?" Nathan nodded, his gaze fixed on the small structure. It was his final contingency, his last resort. "I bought it years ago, under a different name, paid cash. It's off-grid, has its own well for water, a generator for power. I hoped I'd only ever use it for fishing trips with my daughter." His voice was heavy with the weight of that broken hope. "It's the one place no one knows about." He led her inside. The cabin was Spartan, furnished with only the barest of essentials: a wooden table, 2 chairs, a simple bed frame in the corner. But it was functional. The shelves were neatly stocked with rows of canned goods, dried pasta, and medical supplies that went far beyond a simple first aid kit. And in the corner, bolted to the floor, was a heavy, black, fireproof safe. Nathan knelt and began to work the combination dial, the soft clicks echoing in the quiet room. He swung the heavy door open, revealing a small arsenal of weapons, neatly arranged in foam cutouts. The sight of it all, the sheer paranoid preparedness, was the final straw. The adrenaline that had kept Evelyn going for the past 24 hours finally drained away, leaving a vacuum that was instantly filled with a crushing wave of despair. The composure she had so fiercely maintained, the armor of the CEO, shattered into a million pieces. A choked sob escaped her lips, then another. Her legs gave out, and she sank onto one of the hard wooden chairs, burying her face in her hands, her body shaking with uncontrollable tremors. "I can't do this," she cried, her voice cracking, the words muffled by her hands. "I can't. I run $1 billion company. I negotiate with world leaders. I don't run through backyards and hide in cabins and... The words dissolved into ragged, heartbroken sobs. It was a complete release of the terror, the confusion, and the profound helplessness she had been bottling up. Nathan stood from the safe, a moment of hesitation in his posture. He was a man of action, of violence and evasion. This, a woman's tears, was a territory more foreign and terrifying to him than any firefight. Awkwardly, he took a thick wool blanket from the bed, walked over to her, and draped it around her shaking shoulders. His touch was brief, almost hesitant. "You can," he said, his voice quiet, but firm. "And you will. You're stronger than you think, Miss Reed." He stood there for a moment, a silent, awkward guardian, as her sobs slowly subsided into shuddering breaths. Here, in his own territory, his final sanctuary, the power dynamic had shifted completely. She was no longer his employer. She was a terrified woman, and he was her sole protector. He felt a profound, crushing sense of ownership over her safety, a responsibility that went far beyond any professional duty. The cabin, built as a manifestation of his deepest fears, had now become her only hope. "Here," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Here. We are safe. For now." The fire crackled in the stone fireplace, a lone, living thing in the profound silence of the cabin. It cast a warm, flickering light that danced across the rough-hewn wooden walls and the 2 figures who sat in its glow. Outside, the forest was a wall of impenetrable darkness, the deep quiet of the wilderness, a stark contrast to the storm raging within them. Evelyn had regained her composure, the raw, shattering grief replaced by a calm, resolute stillness. She had wrapped the wool blanket around her shoulders like a royal mantle, her spine straight, her eyes fixed on the man who sat across from her, staring into the flames. She had followed his lead, trusted his instincts, and relied on his mysterious skills to survive. Now, she needed the truth. "No more lies, Nathan," she said, her voice quiet but resonant with an unshakable authority. It was the voice she used when closing a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a voice that left no room for negotiation. "I'm not Miss Reed, the CEO, anymore. I'm just a woman hiding for her life in your secret cabin. And you're not just a chauffeur. You're not just a man who's good in a crisis. I've seen the way you move, the way you think. I've seen the gun you carry and the safe full of weapons you keep. I deserve to know who I'm trusting with my life. Tell me who you are." Nathan didn't move for a long moment. He continued to stare into the fire, as if the answers were written in the shifting embers. The flames cast shadows across his face, making it impossible to read his expression. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy with the dust of buried memories, a story he had never intended to tell. "My name wasn't always Nathan Blake," he began, his gaze still lost in the fire. "I drove for a part of the government that doesn't officially exist, a clandestine agency. My unit specialized in high-risk extractions and protective services. When a diplomat was compromised, when an asset was targeted, when a situation went sideways in a place we weren't supposed to be, they sent us. My job was to get people out of situations exactly like this one. I was the driver, the best they had. He paused, taking a slow, deep breath, the confession costing him more than she could possibly imagine. But the job? It has a way of following you home. We weren't ghosts, not to our enemies. They found out about me. They found my family, to use as leverage, to get to me. There was a mission, a bad one. It went wrong, and they retaliated. His voice cracked, just for a second, a single fissure in the wall of his control. My wife, Sarah, she was killed. They made it look like a car accident on a rainy night, a single vehicle collision, but it was no accident. I knew it, and they knew I knew it. It was a message. Evelyn listened, her own pain and fear receding, replaced by a profound, aching empathy. The suspicion she had harbored, the questions and the doubts, all dissolved, transformed into a horrifying understanding. She finally saw the source of his skill, the reason for his paranoia, the depth of his fear. It wasn't just about a job for him. It was about atonement. It was about protection. I couldn't let them get to my daughter, Nathan continued, his voice a raw whisper. Lily was all I had left, so I disappeared. I used every skill they ever taught me to erase myself. I faked my own death, created a new identity from scratch, and buried my past so deep I hoped it would never be found. I became a ghost, a simple chauffeur, a single dad whose biggest worry was paying for his daughter's braces. I built a quiet life, a safe life, and I never looked back, until now. Telling the story was like lancing a wound that had been festering for 8 years. It was painful, exposing the most vulnerable part of himself, but it was also a release. He was sharing the heaviest burden of his life with the one person who could possibly understand the stakes. He finally turned from the fire and looked at her, his eyes filled with a raw, unguarded pain. The final barrier between them, the wall of secrets and suspicion, had crumbled into dust. In its place, a bond was forged, not just of necessity, but of a shared, terrible understanding. They were no longer a CEO and her driver. They were partners. With the truth laid bare between them, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The somber intimacy of the confession gave way to a new, focused energy. Evelyn's sharp, strategic mind, which had been reeling from the chaos, now fully engaged. She was no longer a victim, being shuttled from one hiding place to another. She was a player on the board once more. She stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders, and walked to the wooden table. She was done being reactive. "We can't hide forever, Nathan," she said, her voice crisp and clear. The CEO back in command, but with a new, harder edge. "He'll find us. Argentus tactical. These people Finch hired. They won't stop. They're professionals. They'll canvass. They'll track. They'll bribe. Eventually, they'll find this cabin. Or worse, they'll find Lily. You know it, and I know it." Nathan's jaw tightened at the mention of his daughter. Every protective instinct in his body screamed at him to dig in, to fortify the cabin, to hide her away from the world forever. "This place is secure. I can keep you safe here." "For how long?" she countered, her gaze intense. "A week? A month? We can't live in this cabin for the rest of our lives, and you can't keep your daughter hidden from the world. The only way this ends, the only way we are ever truly safe, is if we end it. We have to go back." "Going back is a suicide mission," he stated flatly, the words a cold, hard fact. "No," she said, leaning over the table, her eyes blazing with a ruthless determination he was beginning to recognize. "Going back is a calculated risk. Hiding is a guaranteed failure. Right now, we are on the defensive. We are the prey. We need to change the game. He thinks he's the hunter. Let's make him the prey. We set the board. We choose the time and the place. We use his own arrogance against him." Nathan looked at her, a grudging admiration dawning in his eyes. He saw the same relentless drive that had made her a titan of industry, but now it was honed to a lethal point and aimed directly at their enemy. He was a man trained to see all the angles, to calculate every risk, and he couldn't flaw her logic. Hiding was a temporary solution, a slow death. Going on the offensive was a gamble, but it was a gamble that offered a permanent solution. He realized she was right. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. The cabin transformed into a makeshift command center. Nathan retrieved a local map from his safe, spreading it out on the table. Evelyn, using a pen and a small notebook from his bug-out bag, began to sketch out a plan, her corporate mind translating the problem into a hostile takeover of their own. She knew Alistair Finch. She knew his psychology, his towering ego, his greed, his impatience. "He's arrogant," she explained, her pen tapping on the paper. "He's furious that his first attempt failed. He'll see it as a personal insult, a loose end that needs to be tied up. He won't delegate it again. He'll want to oversee it himself, to make sure it's done right." Nathan listened, his tactical mind processing her insights. "So, we give him a target he can't resist. You." "Exactly," she confirmed. "We lure him into a trap, a place of our choosing, a place where you can control the environment." Together, they bent over the map, their two worlds colliding. Her knowledge of her enemy's mind, his knowledge of terrain and tactics. They were a formidable team. They pored over the map, discarding locations, until they found the perfect spot. A sprawling, semi-abandoned industrial park and shipyard on the coast. A maze of rusting containers, derelict warehouses, and dark, empty spaces. It was a place where an ambush could be set, a place with multiple escape routes and high vantage points, a place where a hunter could easily become the hunted. The plan was set. It was audacious, dangerous, and their only hope. The final piece required the bait to be dangled in front of the predator. Evelyn picked up the burner phone, her expression set with a cold, hard determination. Nathan watched her, his hands methodically cleaning one of the handguns from his safe, the soft, metallic clicks of the action echoing the frantic beating of his own heart. He was terrified, a cold knot of fear tightening in his stomach. He was a man who had built his entire life around control, and he was about to hand over the most critical part of their plan to her. He was putting his trust, his life, and his daughter's future in her hands. Evelyn took a deep breath, then dialed a number she knew by heart, Alistair Finch's private line. She let it ring 3 times before he picked up. "Who is this?" Finch's voice was a furious snarl, impatient and demanding. Evelyn's lips curled into a smile that was pure ice. Her voice, when she spoke, dripped with a theatrical, mocking contempt. "Alistair, I'm so disappointed. I always knew you were incompetent, but this is a new low. If you're going to try and kill me, at least hire people who can get the job done." There was a stunned, sputtering silence on the other end of the line. "Evelyn, you're alive." "Very," she purred. "And I have everything. The shell corporations, the wire transfers, the payments to your band of third-rate mercenaries. It's all on a tidy little hard drive. My lawyers would have a field day with it. But I've decided it's worth more to me as my ticket out. My retirement fund." "You're bluffing," he snarled, but she could hear the tremor of fear beneath his anger. "Am I?" she taunted. "You want to take that chance? Or do you want to buy my silence? Meet me at the old shipyard tomorrow at midnight, the west entrance. Come alone, and bring $1.2 million in bearer bonds. A small price to pay for your freedom, don't you think? You get the drive, and I disappear forever. Or you can refuse, and the entire world will see what kind of monster you really are by sunrise." She didn't wait for an answer. She ended the call, tossing the phone onto the table. The trap was set. The time and place for the final confrontation were established. The climax was now inevitable. She looked at Nathan, her eyes shining with a dangerous, exhilarating thrill. She had taken back control. Nathan met her gaze, a mixture of terror and awe on his face. It was the single most reckless, dangerous thing he had ever witnessed. And it was brilliant. The abandoned shipyard was a graveyard of industry. It sprawled under the cold light of a full moon, a skeletal maze of rusting shipping containers stacked like forgotten building blocks. Derelict warehouses stood with broken windows like vacant eyes, their corrugated metal walls bleeding rust down to the cracked asphalt. The air, thick with the smell of salt, diesel, and decay, was heavy with a silence that felt more like a held breath than peace. The only sounds were the distant cry of a gull and the gentle lapping of dark water against the rotting piers. They had arrived hours earlier, slipping into the industrial park's perimeter like shadows. Evelyn watched from the concealment of a crumbling brick archway as Nathan moved through the labyrinth. He was a phantom in the gloom, his dark clothing making him one with the shadows. He flowed through the landscape, not with the hesitation of a stranger, but with the grim familiarity of a predator mapping its hunting ground. He identified the spot for the meeting, a relatively open space between two colossal, crane-like loading structures, an arena with limited access points that he could watch from above. For the next hour, he worked. He didn't set bombs or deadly snares, but a series of small, ingenious, non-lethal traps designed to confuse and separate. He loosened a stack of empty oil drums, balancing them precariously so a single pull on a nearly invisible tripwire would send them crashing down. He pried open a junction box, rewiring it so he could short out a bank of the few remaining security lamps from a distance. He moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency that made Evelyn's heart ache with a mixture of fear and gratitude. Finally, he made his way back to her. He handed her a tiny, flesh-colored earpiece. "Keep this in. Don't talk unless you have to. I'll hear everything," he murmured, his voice low. He then pointed up into the darkness, towards the operator's booth of the largest crane, a glass and steel box suspended 100 feet in the air. "I'll be there. I have a rifle. It's for suppression, not elimination. The goal is to get Finch to incriminate himself. We have a device on you recording everything." He touched the small, decorative pin on her lapel, a piece of modern jewelry she'd found in his bag. "This is the microphone. Just get him to talk. Get him to admit it." He looked her in the eyes, his own gaze intense, the cold calm of the mission warring with the fierce, personal protectiveness he now felt for her. "Remember the plan. Keep him talking. My priority is you. If it goes bad, if I feel for a second we're losing control, I'm pulling you out. The evidence doesn't matter. Your life does." Evelyn took a deep, steadying breath, the cold night air stinging her lungs. She felt a strange, exhilarating cocktail of fear and absolute focus. For the first time in days, she was not just a survivor, she was a combatant. She was facing her would-be murderer, not as a victim, but as the architect of his downfall. "Don't worry, Nathan," she said, her voice a firm, confident whisper that belied the frantic hammering of her heart. "I've handled tougher negotiations than this. Just be ready." He gave her a single, sharp nod, then melted back into the shadows, beginning his ascent into the darkness. Midnight arrived with a chilling stillness. The designated meeting spot was bathed in the eerie, pale glow of the moon and a single, flickering security lamp that cast long, dancing shadows. Evelyn stood alone in the center of the clearing, a small, defiant figure dwarfed by the industrial skeletons around her. She held a decoy hard drive in her hand, her posture radiating a confidence she did not entirely feel. Through the earpiece, she could hear nothing but the faint whisper of the wind, a sound that told her Nathan was in position, silent and waiting. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness, and a black luxury sedan, the same model as her own, rolled silently into the shipyard. It stopped 50 yards away. Alistair Finch got out of the passenger side. He was not alone. 4 large men in dark suits emerged from the car with him, their movements fluid and professional. Argentus tactical, they fanned out immediately, securing the perimeter, their eyes scanning the shadows, their hands never far from the weapons concealed beneath their jackets. Finch, his handsome face twisted into a mask of arrogant fury, strode towards her. "You have a lot of nerve," he spat, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Where is it?" Evelyn gave him a slow, pitying smile. "Always so impatient, Alistair. Is that how you handle all your business? With the subtlety of a sledgehammer?" She held up the decoy drive. "You want this, you'll get it. But first I want to hear you say it. Why? After all our years as rivals, why cross this line?" "You were in my way," he roared, his voice echoing slightly in the open space. He took another step closer, his rage making him careless. "Reed Industries was my legacy, my birthright. I built it from the ground up while you were getting lucky on a single patent. You didn't deserve it. With you gone, the board would have folded. The company would have been mine, as it should have been. So you hired those thugs to run me off the road? To murder me in broad daylight?" Evelyn pressed, her voice cold and clear, each word a carefully placed stone in the foundation of his guilt. "They weren't thugs, you arrogant witch. They were professionals," he sneered. "A job they failed. A mistake I'm here to correct personally." He lost the last of his patience and gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod to his men. It was the signal. They began to move in, converging on her from 4 different directions. The world erupted. A loud crack echoed from above as the security lamp exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging 2 of the mercenaries into absolute darkness. Simultaneously, a deafening crash of metal on metal erupted from the far side of the yard as the oil drums Nathan had rigged came tumbling down. The other 2 men spun towards the sound, their weapons drawn, their attention completely diverted. "Now, Evelyn, move!" Nathan's voice was a sharp command in her ear. In the chaos, she ran, following the escape route they had planned. Finch, enraged and momentarily blinded by the sudden darkness, let out a furious scream. He pulled his own gun from his jacket and sprinted after her, ignoring his disoriented men. He was a man possessed, his arrogance curdling into pure, murderous rage. Evelyn scrambled behind a massive stack of shipping containers, her heart pounding. Finch was right behind her, his heavy footsteps closing in. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the side of the crane's massive base. Nathan. He had descended from his perch with impossible speed and silence. He stepped directly into Finch's path. Finch stopped, stunned for a fraction of a second, before raising his gun. But Nathan was already moving. He lunged forward, not at the gun, but at Finch's arm, deflecting the shot which went wide with a deafening roar. The fight was brutal and short. Nathan moved with a fluid, economic violence. A whirlwind of precise strikes and blocks, he broke Finch's grip on the weapon, sending it skittering across the asphalt. Finch, reverting to a brawler's rage, threw a wild punch. Nathan ducked under it, spun, and drove his elbow into Finch's side, then swept his leg, sending the larger man crashing to the ground. He followed him down, his knee pressing hard on Finch's chest, his hand gripping Finch's throat. He didn't kill him. He didn't even hit him again. He simply held him there, a coiled spring of lethal potential, his face a mask of cold, hard victory. "It's over," Nathan said, his voice low and steady. As if on cue, the first wail of approaching sirens began to cut through the night air, growing steadily closer. The sound of justice, arranged and delivered. Weeks later, the world was a different place. The sun was warm, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the air was filled with the sound of children's laughter. At the big park, the one with the swings that made your stomach feel funny, Nathan Blake was pushing his daughter Lily higher and higher. He was relaxed, a genuine, easy smile on his face. The shadows that had haunted his eyes for so long were gone, replaced by a quiet, peaceful light. Evelyn Reed sat on a nearby bench, dressed not in a power suit, but in simple jeans and a soft cashmere sweater. She watched them, a small, genuine smile on her face, a bag of popcorn resting in her lap. The aftermath had been handled with her typical, ruthless efficiency. The recording she had made was the final, undeniable nail in Alistair Finch's coffin. Faced with irrefutable evidence of conspiracy to commit murder, he and his captured mercenaries from Argentis Tactical had been swiftly arrested. Arthur, her loyal security head, had worked with the authorities, feeding them information while Evelyn's legal team built an impenetrable wall around Nathan. His real identity remained buried, protected under layers of corporate and legal security so thick that not even the federal government could breach them. Nathan Blake, the simple chauffeur, was the only man who had been there. Nathan slowed the swing, and Lily jumped off, running towards Evelyn with a happy shriek. "Can I have some?" she asked, pointing at the popcorn. "Of course, sweetie," Evelyn said, handing her the bag. Nathan walked over, his hands in his pockets, the picture of a relaxed suburban dad. "Thanks for coming," he said softly. "I wouldn't have missed it," she replied. She looked at him, her expression warm. "Heard you were looking for a new driving job. I happen to know a CEO who's in the market for a new head of personal security. The pay is, frankly, ridiculous, and she has a strict policy that he has to be home for dinner every night. No exceptions." One quote. A slow smile spread across Nathan's face. "Is that so? Is she as demanding as my last boss?" Evelyn laughed, a real, musical laugh. "Worse, much worse, but I hear she trusts him with her life." Their eyes met, and in that shared gaze was a universe of understanding, of shared trauma and forged trust. He had found a way to integrate his past with his present, a way to use his skills not for a shadowy government, but to protect the people who had become his world. She had found something more valuable than any market share or corporate acquisition: loyalty, friendship, and a safety she had never known. He nodded slowly. I think I'd like that job. Lily, having devoured a handful of popcorn, looked from Nathan's smiling face to Evelyn's. Are you two going to get married? She asked, with the simple, direct logic of an 8-year-old. The question hung in the warm, sunny air, a surprising, hopeful note on which to build a new beginning.